How's it going, everyone? James Lynch here, filling in this week for Daniel Levi. Thanks so much for Dan having me here in the seat. But I am going to be joined by Dan Tom, my co-host here today. Dan, how's it going?
You can get rid of one Dan, James, but you can't get rid of us all. You're stuck with me this week, but I am glad to be stuck with you, sir. Thanks for filling in.
Yeah, what a big card to be a part of and to preview here today. As I want to remind our viewers, as always, check out blitzbet.eu. If you're in Canada like I am, you can definitely go enjoy those odds and play some bets on the card this weekend. It's going to be an awesome card. We got a lot to talk about, Dan, Tom. We might as well dive right into it. UFC 253 going down at the Apex, not at the Apex, on Yas Island, I should say, in Abu Dhabi. See, we're so used to the cards being in Vegas that I kind of forgot they're in Abu Dhabi. But yes, they are back on Fight Island. Really looking forward to this one. 2 title fights on the card, but we're going to start first. In the main event, we've got the middleweight champion, Israel Adesanya, looking to keep that undefeated record as he faces another undefeated fighter in Paulo Costa. Right now, if you go on BlitzBet, in terms of the odds of this fight, you got Israel Adesanya as the betting favorite in this one. And just taking a quick look at the odds here, Adesanya comes in at minus 185, Paulo Costa coming in at plus 149. That's sort of how I see this fight. Very close, but I got to get the man, the Mr. Technique, the Mr. Technical, Dan Tom's take on this one. A lot at stake here for both guys. But Dan, how are you looking at this fight from a style perspective?
Hey, man, technical was my gamer tag in Counter-Strike 20 years ago. So thanks for that shout to my fellow gamer, James Lynch. But as far as this matchup goes, yeah, I was actually kind of surprised at the odds. It opened as a minus 140 favorite. So it opened pretty tight, giving a lot of respect to Costa, which I don't mind, man. I'm a big fan of Bohachinia. He is more than just a bully, something I've been saying since he made his debut. I even went back to read my early write-ups on the guy. And a lot hasn't changed. He's just kind of sharpened it up. And he should gain your respect. And we can talk about some nuts and bolts as they apply here in a second. But ultimately, James, I was not only surprised by the betting lines, but even though I try not to peek at other people's work, we'll talk about some picks that I saw you make on Octagon Outlook that were very interesting. But a lot of people I respect, James, are taking the Paulo Costa side here. And that shouldn't surprise me. But it kind of does.
Surprises me as well. One of the things I talked about on Monday, and I want to get your take on this, is just the experience that Israel Adesanya brings into this fight. Let's forget even about the UFC experience because he has more fights than Paulo Costa. He's fought better competition overall. I mean, you talk about Robert Whittaker and Calvin Gastelum, and they both fought Romero. But, in general, I think you could argue that Adesanya's fought that. But how about the kickboxing experience? 75-5 record in kickboxing. He's also got 5 boxing fights. Like, I know Costa's got some great knockout power and certainly is the more powerful fighter in this fight, but I don't know how people are blinded by that. That is a huge factor. And when you look at Paulo Costa and his bread and butter, he's not taking it to the ground. He's going to try and take Adesanya's head off. But when you're fighting a guy who's so technical in the stand-up, like Israel Adesanya is, I just don't see where he's able to beat him unless he's able to get in on the inside and land that knockout punch. We should mention, Dan, that Adesanya has been knocked out before in kickboxing. Alex Pereira in Glory knocked him out, but it's been a while. And we've seen that in his fights. Calvin Gastelum dropped him in their fight late in the interim middleweight title fight last year. And it was a fight where you thought, oh, maybe he's going to get finished, but he persevered and he came back. So, I talked about the experience there. The other thing is just the fact that Adesanya's been battle tested. He has fights that have gone 5 rounds before. What happens if this fight goes past the 3rd round? Is Paulo Costa going to be able to get in that 3rd or 4th gear and be able to still have the pressure and the cardio that Adesanya has shown in a lot of his fights? So to me, I feel like this is Adesanya's fight to lose unless he gets careless, unless maybe in the back of his head he's thinking, you know what, fans were upset with that last fight. Maybe I got to do something spectacular. He doesn't strike me as that type of guy to make that sort of error to fan pressure. But what's your take on the experience and also just overall what people are saying about Costa? Because I kind of feel like there's a little bit of Johnny Walker-esque in how people are valuing Costa in this fight, if you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, there's a bit of that, but I'm glad you brought up the experience, James, because experience is not just a factor. It's the double-edged sword when we talk about that undefeated mentality. It's what's going to make Paulo Costa dangerous. It also could make him fall into some traps that we know Adesanya sets. Whereas Adesanya, he is undefeated too, but like you said, James, he's got more experience, including losses, which we can look at as a negative, but I value that highly. He's tasted defeat. He's tasted knockouts. He's been able to climb back from it in both sports, in both rule sets. That's really big. The experience onion is the proverbial thing to peel here, James. It's got the most layers to it when you talk about rounds. I think that people are getting too focused on, and this is coming from an analyst who loves the minutia, by the way. No hate on that. I just kind of feel that this is a fight where people can get too focused on the stylistic layers, that the onion there, because peeling that onion is really fun, James. You know, when we look at the footwork, the power, both guys like to target the body. What happens when Israel Adesanya switches to southpaw? Like, these are all legitimate questions. It's what makes this fight fun. But as far as getting to the root of what we're talking about, whether picking or the odds perspective of picking a winner of this fight, I think it's experience. You nailed it, James, because again, we can talk about all the technique and the level of Adesanya and the underrated level of Costa. But James, you've been watching the sport long enough. What happens to the most well-laid of plans, even at the top level, even to the most technical guys? As we saw in Adesanya's last fight, sometimes you're still left with an ugly fight. And whether it's an ugly fight or an exciting fight, seldom do things go as planned. So to pretend that we can't find ourselves at the end of the third round, now going into Paulo Costa's fourth round, is not a crazy thought that you bring up at all, James. And that is, I guess, why a big reason of why I'm leaning toward Israel Adesanya to retain here.
I also want to bring up another thing in this fight that I don't think a lot of people are looking at, and that is the height and reach advantage in this fight. You know, this is going to be, I think, I was looking at his resume here just, briefly. It looks like this is almost the biggest opponent that Costa's fought. And, you think of Costa with, being such a big guy, cutting so much weight. But, Adesanya coming into this fight, he's 6'4" with an 80-inch reach. Costa is only 6'1" with a 72-inch reach. So there's a big reach advantage there for Adesanya. And that's what I mean. Like, if Costa can't get on the inside, how's he going to look in this fight if he can't go in there? I mean, Yoel Romero's kind of a smaller middleweight, so he's able to sort of do what he wanted with him. But with Adesanya, you've got that reach, and Adesanya's a guy who uses his reach well. So I'm curious to see if that's a factor. The other thing I wanted to bring up as well is another factor in this fight. Costa hasn't fought since last August. That Romero fight was actually back on the Nate Diaz and Anthony Pettis card, which was also the Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier card as well. But if you think about it, Adesanya's fought 2 more times since then. He had the fight obviously against Whitaker where he unified the title and won the title, and then he fought Romero shortly after that. So I think that's another thing too to look at, the fact that Adesanya a little bit more active, a little bit more fresh. And like I said, the experience, let's take away Uriah Hall and Yoel Romero. I mean, Paulo Costa's got wins over Johnny Hendricks, Olawale Bambos. Like, those are not good middleweights. They're not even in the UFC anymore. So that's another thing I think we need to add in here with the fact that Adesanya, and you even look before some of the bigger fights that Adesanya had, he has a win over Marvin Vettori. That looks good now. Has a knockout win over Derek Brunson. That looks really good now with what Brunson's been able to do since losing that fight. You've also got the Brad Tavares fight from an experience perspective, where he did get to go a full 5 rounds in that one in a main event. And it was a good showing of how Adesanya can go the full length. So I know I mentioned a lot of stuff there, but the 2 key things I wanted to point out, the layoff and the height and reach. How much do you see that being a factor in this fight?
Yeah, I love that you brought up the reach, James, because you know me, and most people know me. I'm not a stats guy in the traditional sense. I'll use them where they supplement an argument appropriately and not hang my hat on it. And there are better people like Fight Metric Read, who've already broke down reach better than I can. As far as 6 inches is kind of your baseline to where you should start considering it, whether it matters or not from a layman's sense. However, we're talking about, I believe off the top of my head, a 72 to 80 inch disparity, right? That is 10 inches. That is big. And more specifically, attaching it to actual tangible analysis, which is more my style. When we look at that, James, when's the last time he had that? Well, it was against Uriah Hall, who clocks in at 79 inches. He's only an inch shorter than Adesanya. And it's really deceptive because Hall isn't that tall. Hall is a size parity of 6'1" to Costa. So in other words, the reach shouldn't seem as emphatic, nor should it feel as emphatic or have, the torso, the legs, and everything that Adesanya has attached to it. Yet still, say what you will about Hall, his inconsistency, Hall was lighting him up, and it was a more consistent Hall performance where he's really getting behind his underrated quick jab and using that speed that Hall is known for. But Hall was bloodying Bohachinha's nose up, and don't listen to the commentary, folks, on that fight. It's one of those fights, no offense, broadcasting does a fantastic job, but a lot of Hall shots weren't getting picked up, and it's one of those fights where you watch it on silent and you really see where the reach advantage comes into play. More specifically, Hall was the person who hurt Bohachinha the most, I would say, even more than any point in the Yoel Romero fight. And how did he do it? He shifted to southpaw with a right hook. We've seen Israel Adesanya have those shots. He really has a really mean left hook, although he did drop Robert Whittaker with a check right hook as well in the end of the first round, although finishing with a left in the second. Adesanya has those tools. He shifts the southpaw to counter. And even against Johnny Hendricks, who, that win didn't age well, like you said, James. But, those southpaw weapons, whether we're talking about the check right hook that lefties shouldn't leave home without, or your counter cross, all of those fighters were able to hit him with that straight shot all day long. And coming back from a layoff and playing into, how's the gas tank going to do? Obviously, Yoel Romero won the third round. I had him scoring. I had it for Yoel, by the way, 29-28, giving him the second. No robbery, just saying my scorecard there. Like, we've seen these things happen, but we've seen these things happen before. So I know I'm ranting on here, but these southpaw attacks and these straight shots keep jumping at me. And again, Blachowicz is technically not undefeated. Even though neither guy has fought in the pandemic era, Blachowicz has fought in tough, which is pretty close because they're crowdless. And in that fight, he won his first fight pretty easily, but he fought, granted, a welterweight, but a credible UFC southpaw veteran in Marcio Alessandre. I believe he made it to the finals, and he lost via split decision. And what did we see? Blachowicz gassed himself out. That fight was a long time ago. I'm not putting a lot into it, but I'm not convinced that the quietness and the adrenaline and the crowd, I'm not sure that's going to help his gas tank any more or less here, James.
So we both pick Adesanya in the main event. I'm curious to get our picks, or your pick, I should say, in the co-main event as we move along here to the vacant light heavyweight title fight. We're not talking about Jon Jones or Daniel Cormier. First time in a while since, I guess, Shogun was champion, since we're talking about someone else that will be the new light heavyweight champion coming up here. But it is Dominic Reyes taking on Jan Blachowicz. And if you go on BlitzBet right now, Dominic Reyes, the favorite, coming in at -286, Jan Blachowicz at +220. I talked about this on Monday. I think this is a more clear-cut fight than the main event, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on this one, Dan. Which way are you leaning on this fight?
Too, which almost disappoints me because I like both guys, and I don't want to speak simply about this. But when I ran it through the proverbial comb, James, I kind of came up the same way as my lean, which is to Reyes, the favorite. And I don't even hate that, money's coming in on him. I understand it. However, Blachowicz is always a live dog. And he always has been. He even says so in interviews himself. He's used to it. He's always the underdog. And I'm really interested in this one. I'm really interested in the body work and the underrated boxing and the lessons of both there. Because even though both guys also have underrated wrestling offensively and defensively in Reyes' case, I'm not sure we see too much of that there. It would be interesting, I think, stylistically for Dominic Reyes to go and attack like how, Corey Anderson in the first fight and other fighters used to attack Jan. And as long as you can survive his jiu-jitsu black belt threat arm bars, you're usually okay in that guard down there at light heavyweight. However, it's a 5-round fight, guys. And even though, Reyes arguably just beat Jon Jones in a 5-round fight, it was his first 5-round fight. I expect his pace management to be better, but I'm not sure we're going to see some bantamweight, style level, Dominic Cruz style from Dominic Reyes. And I'm not sure Dominic Reyes, as confident as he is in himself, is going to go out there and push that kind of wrestling pace. So even though I suspect he's going to be aggressive here, James, I think he's going to look to keep it standing, and we're going to get a striking affair in the feet. Is that generally your read here?
It is. And I think this is a case too where, and I talked about this on Monday, where I feel like Blachowicz is actually being a little bit overrated a little bit. And I'll explain why. Is that, you look at the wins that he's had recently, especially the Corey Anderson and the Luke Rockhold fights. I think people forget that those are two fighters that have been knocked out several times before that. If you look at Rockhold, especially, Bisping knocked him out, Belfort knocked him out, Blachowicz knocked him out. I didn't think he would at light heavyweight, but apparently Luke Rockhold still not good striking defense, even in a different weight class. But I bring that up because, he's on a 3-fight win streak, but who's the guy he lost to before that? It was Thiago Santos, who in my opinion is on that level of Dominic Reyes where, he's in that title contention. He's another guy that pushed Jon Jones to the brink. He actually had a split decision loss against Jon Jones in that fight. And in that fight, it showed me that, as the fight went on, sort of that youth and just sort of the overall speed and technique of Thiago Santos ended up taking over and ended up getting him the win in that fight. And that's why I look at Reyes in this fight. And I think it's a little bit more clear cut in the co-main event as far as Reyes winning this fight. Now, I know Blachowicz is a guy that does get underestimated. I mean, He does surprise a lot of times. But again, I look at like a Corey Anderson. I mean, a lot of people were picking Anderson in that fight, but you look at Anderson's losses, they're all by knockout for the most part, right? Oven St. Preux, Jimmy Manua. This is a guy that does have chin issues. So I feel like Blachowicz just exploited that. And I think Anderson as well had a chip on his shoulder, maybe a little too emotional going in that fight. He felt like he should have got the shot before, and he didn't like how he was with Johnny Walker and stuff. So I feel like, that was almost a fight that Corey Anderson, partially lost himself. I'm not going to take, full credit away from Blachowicz. He knocked him out fair and square. That's why he's getting the shot. But the other thing, Dan, is that Blachowicz is 37 years old. Reyes is only 30. That's a huge age gap there. And I know Blachowicz is still competing at a high level, but I just wonder if he can't go out there and make lightning strike twice again and go out with a knockout. What's going to happen as the fight goes on? To me, you got a guy in Reyes who's more athletic. He comes from that football background. For this camp, I love the fact that he went to Elevation Fight Team and trained with Curtis Blades and those guys over there. He brought his buddy Nick Rorick over there as well, former UFC fighter. He's working on the cardio. I think he knew, Dan, that last fight, he sort of gave it away in those later rounds. And I don't think he wants that to happen again. In fact, I don't think he wants to go to the judges' scorecards at all to avoid what happened last time. So I really think that Reyes is going to pace himself in this fight and look to look for a finish later in the fight, say 4th, 5th round, when Blachowicz, I would assume, is going to be a little bit more tired, doesn't have the a lot of 5-round experience. So I could see this being a scenario where Reyes waits and picks his shot and takes advantage of it. But I really like Dominic Reyes here. Now Blachowicz actually has the reach advantage, Reyes has the height advantage, but the youth, that's really what I like here with Dominic Reyes. I think he's really in the prime of his career right now. And while Blachowicz has looked great at a high level, and like I said, 3-fight win streak heading into this one, I just think Reyes is the better fighter at this stage in their career. So curious to get your thoughts on that.
I can't really hate that. It sounds kind of cliche, but I think the speed and athleticism is going to be the ultimate difference here. And although it still can get dicey if this gets past round 3, I think it's a more forgiving fighter in Jan Blachowicz to fight those later rounds in, because even though he has technically looked better in the time he went 5 rounds in the UFC, it was a very low output fight against Jacare Souza. It's very unfair to compare those two than the championship level fight against John Jones, who, say what you will about scoring, Jones was doing his part to help keep that fight at a very high pace. So I warn anybody directly comparing those apple for apples there. It'll get dicey either way if this goes later. But I think the speed and athleticism here, as well as the southpaw stance. You mentioned Thiago Santos, who isn't a southpaw, but again, mentioning that right hook, he knocked Jan Blachowicz out with that. That was his last loss. That being said, Blachowicz is technically 2-0 against UFC level southpaws. Luke Rockhold, who I agree. I picked Blachowicz in that fight for a reason. No offense to Rockhold and what he's done. And then, of course, his last KSW fight against Goran Reljic of UFC 84 Ill Will fame. So, I mean, I don't know how much stock you want to put into those southpaw victories, James. But, I think he's going to be kind of anticlimactic fight like it was for Anderson this time around for Jan. And I kind of suspect Reyes is going to spark him out within the first 2 rounds here.
So we're both on Reyes, both on Adesanya. I have a feeling this next fight, we're going to be disagreeing a little bit on this one, but we got the flyweights. By the way, I just got to mention this. This is a pretty decent pay-per-view, but as soon as we start talking about this fight onwards, it's not that great of a card. I think if anything, last week's card was a little bit stronger overall, but hey, you got to do what you got to do. You got to spread out the wealth a little bit. But we got Kia Kara France taking on Brandon Royval in the flyweight division. I will say that I do like the fact that the UFC is putting a flyweight fight on the pay-per-view. Got to give that division a little bit more shine here. And with Adesanya in the main event, a City Kickboxing guy, his teammate Kia Kara France here, I think it's a great move on that part. Just wanted to mention that as a sort of an extra tidbit here. But if you're looking at the odds right now, Kia Kara France about a 2-1 favorite, minus 233. Brandon Royval, the comeback, plus 190 in this fight. I'm curious to get your breakdown on this one, Dan.
This is the fight I'm probably most excited to talk to you about because when I was listening to Octagon Outlook, again, folks, especially with the MMA Mondays have really taken a shift these last couple of years. May I point to our man, James Lynch. It's one of my favorite early MMA week rituals that should be a part of your MMA week, fight week or not, although every week's fight week ritual. Check out Octagon Outlook. I wasn't surprised to hear, James, that you were on Brandon Royval, unless you can reserve your right to pick the change. Maybe it has. And with full disclosure, as I always do on this show, I actually submitted because it was super late last night and I had to have my picks in by this morning for staff picks. I submitted Kai Kara France, but I haven't been high on Kai Kara France, and this is a fight where I'm reserving my right to change my staff picks. and possibly here. I wanted to state that ahead of time because I respect your opinion, James. And also, human nature is human nature. So inadvertently, especially a smooth talker like yourself, Mr. Lynch, you could sway me here. So not that I want to take away credit from you if you do, but I just want to put my cards on the table to where I'm at mentally. Now, I still have to go back and refresh myself with some Royval LFA. My impression was this is a jiu-jitsu guy who is a jiu-jitsu black belt, by the way, folks. He throws a lot of kicks. I want to see more on boxing range. I didn't really see a lot. You know, there was the fight with the Rodriguez cat, that tall southpaw that had a really ugly ending. We didn't really get to see. Was really excited for that fight. We really didn't get to see that one play out. We have seen subsequent performances from Royval, which I want to go back and watch, James. And I do have the Tim Elliott fight fresh in my head, but this is a complete different opponent. This is an opponent who's not going to be shooting 10 takedowns within a round and a half on him like Tim Elliott did, who essentially wrestled himself into a whole very poor move. Kai Kara France, folks, he actually does have some wrestling and jiu-jitsu credentials, albeit not major ones, albeit not in a major region, but you have to give credit where credit's due, and you do see that in his style. However, even if this doesn't go to the ground, which as I'm watching tape, not completely done, full disclosure, but as I'm watching tape, I'm not thinking this goes to the ground, James. But the reason why I'm still thinking about changing my pick to Royval is because even though I think Paiva beat Kai Kara France, which is why I picked Moreno to beat him, and that he did, even though Moreno's not even as good of a kicker as maybe either Paiva or Royval. Well, we saw that Kai Kara France doesn't react well to kicks. He won't take those takedowns. I imagine he's not going to take those opportunities here against a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. And if he's weak to the body, as well as, this is very problematic, and I like Kai Kara France. I love his team. I'm not trying to talk bad about him. But James, at bantamweight and flyweight, those are, you have to have cardio. You cannot start fading in the third round. It doesn't matter how good of a fighter, how good the rest of your skills are at the UFC level in those weight classes, you cannot afford to fade in the third. God forbid you get to a championship fight. So for that reason, I think this is going to be a really close fight. Royval doesn't really win when it goes to the scorecards, but if they're judging on damage and he starts spamming and hurting Kai Kara France to the body, we got a close fight on our hands, James. You're picking Royval, right? Am I talking?
I am picking Royval. No, I probably should have jumped in and said, yeah, I'm picking Royval, just so there wasn't any sort of wonder there. But no, I like Royval in this fight. And one thing I will mention, I didn't really clarify on Monday, but I should point it out, is that Tim Elliott, I mean, he has some bad fight IQ. I think you can agree with this, Dan, where there's times where he just has these lapses. And in the case of the Royval fight, when he fought Tim Elliott, that was another case where Elliott just put himself in a bad position. Royval capitalized and took advantage of it. So that is one little tidbit to add to that win that he had, which was his debut, and he was a big underdog in that fight as well. But the thing I like about Royval is a number of things. So you talk sort of about the regional scene. I mean, go look at who he fought in the regional scene. Nothing but tough guys here. That fight you referenced was actually Jerome Rivera, who, if you remember, fought last week, got knocked out by Tyson Nam. That was the fight where that was like a test for both guys to see where they belong. But obviously Rivera got that injury, which was gruesome. Don't go watch it. I want people to be able to eat their dinner tonight. So that's something interesting. But I mean, you look at the wins here. Demetrius Wilson, who's 5-1 at the time. Rivera, who's 7-1 at the time. I know it ended in an injury. Charles Johnson, another guy I've been following for a while, who I believe is in Thailand now training. He was 7-1 at the time. People will look at the Casey Kenny loss, but you got to remember that was supposed to be Marcus Perez and Casey Kenny fighting. Marcus Perez, the King's MMA product, had to pull out of that fight at the last minute. Royval steps in with not much of a camp, had to fight a guy in Kenny who doesn't even fight at flyweight anymore. He's so big that he has to fight at bantamweight. And he ended up losing that fight just because Kenny out wrestled him, basically. But it was a size discrepancy in that fight. That's where Kenny sort of took advantage of that. But no, the reason I like Royval's chances is a couple things. Again, the height and reach advantage in this fight comes from a great camp, and he's actually getting to work with high quality guys that are in his weight class. Kara France doesn't have that luxury at City Kickboxing. Like, he's working with like Hooker and all these other guys, but I don't really know of a lot of like flyweights or lower weight class guys that he gets to work with over there. But Brandon Royval's got an influx of it. Yusuf Zalal, Jonathan Martinez, Chris Gutierrez, Colin Anglin, who won on Contender Series recently and picked up a UFC contract. He's just got a lot of guys that are pushing him in that weight class, and I think that's a very big advantage for Brandon Royval in this fight. He also quit his job. I mean, to consider the fact that Royval was winning all these fights when he was working, overnights at where he was doing his job, and now he doesn't have to worry about that. I've even spoke to him before this fight, and he said, "Look, like, my training's been great because I don't have to worry about sleep or anything because I can structure my schedule properly." So I just think this is a spot where where a lot of people look at Kara France and they go, oh yeah, Israel Adesanya's teammate. And they just sort of keep that in mind. It's a city kickboxing thing. And I feel like that's why the line is so high, because I do see this as more of an even fight. And I think it's either Royval is going to, potentially, avoid any sort of damage from Kara France in this fight. And I think the later the rounds go, I would give the advantage to Royval. So I could see Royval pulling off a decision or perhaps a late finish in this one. But keep in mind, he's in Colorado as well. So that elevation training, the cardio is going to be on point. That's why I like Brandon Royval in this fight. I think as an underdog, I think there's a lot of value in him on this card. And I definitely am going to take a stab on this one, just because I do think this is a case where Kara France slightly overrated. And quickly, I mentioned this on Monday. Kara France's best win is really Tyson Nam, and Nam's won 2 straight since then. But you look at his other wins: De La Rosa, the Paiva fight, like you said, should have gone the other way. Elias Garcia. Yep. I mean, these are not really top-notch guys. They're, De La Rosa, I don't even know if he's still with the UFC. He lost another fight. So, and it seemed like when he did have that step up in Moreno, he ended up losing. So we'll see. But I just think France tad overhyped a little bit here, and I think Royval's being overlooked as he was in his debut. So I'm going to take Royval. I'll take him by decision.
I felt that way too.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, James.
No, I was actually meant to lead you, and I just kind of stopped there. But go ahead.
I was gonna say, yeah, man. Like in that Casey Kenny fight, wasn't that on short notice as well? And
yes.
It went 5 rounds. So to go 5 rounds and make it 5 rounds alone is tough. Then you got a guy stylistically who is as good of a grappler, except has judo and wrestling credentials. So he's going to control where it happens. And then on the feet, it's a southpaw versus southpaw matchup, which is a southpaw. I can tell you that's a nightmare. You're not going to, the better striker doesn't win those matchups a lot of the times, especially at the amateur level. So he had all those things going against him. So be careful when you see that Casey Kenny fight. If anything, it should actually, give him some credit in a loss there, considering all those factors. And yeah, I mean, it was weird because Moreno beat him, but he didn't shoot for a takedown once. And Nam shot for 4 takedowns, and Kara France defended all 4, but they were half-hearted takedowns. And if you see Nam, you'll know why. It's not really his style. He'll mix it in for looks in the clinch, but he's not really trying to take you down or finish you there. Nam's trying to knock you out on the feet. And Nam, I love Nam, and I'm really happy to see him doing well. He deserves to do well. He is a top-level flyweight. However, stylistically, like Kara France and Sergio Pettis are probably the worst stylistic fights for him, which was almost like maddening as a Tyson Nam guy going, why are you going to take those fights? I knew how those fights were going to end before they even happened. So I don't put a lot of weight into that. And like you said, James, that's his best that's his best win. And guys who, weren't the best athletes, no offense, and Mark De La Rosa and Elias Garcia, those are guys that were able to take Kara France down. So, if Royval's working on that part of the game, and according to his Instagram, you got a bunch of wrestlers that are coming through with the wrestling training facility up there in Colorado. And they seem to have a good relationship with Factory X with their guys right now as well.
Another quick tidbit, Brandon Royval going to have Alex Hernandez in his corner. He's actually made the move from Texas to Factory X. Been a great fit there from everyone I've talked to at that camp. So that's got to be another, advantage for him over there, getting to work with a really powerful guy in Alex Hernandez, just with what he gets to do in the gym, really a good look for him there. We got 2 more fights on the main card to go through. We're going to go in the women's bantamweight division. We've got Caitlin Vieira taking on Sijara Eubanks. This was supposed to be Marion Renault. Renault was out. Eubanks steps in. Eubanks fought 2 weeks ago, got the win over Julia Avila. And I actually remember breaking down that fight and being like, I'm telling you guys, like, I think Avila's going to win this, but don't count out Sarge. She's found like another gear in her career here. So let's look at the odds right now. Vieira, obviously the favorite, minus 192, Sarge plus 153. Actually, the odds, it seemed like were a bit higher before for Caitlin Vieira, but I want to warn people about this fight because look, Vieira on paper, definitely the better fighter, more accomplished, better competition, everything else. Let's not forget that she was supposed to be fighting Amanda. This was the woman who was supposed to fight Amanda Nunes this year. It did not end up happening. Irene Aldana spoiled those plans, ended up knocking her out at UFC 245. But up until that point, she looked great. I mean, she was undefeated at that point. And here's Sijara Eubanks stepping in. And in my opinion, Dan, and I'll get your thoughts on this. Like, this is kind of a dangerous fight for Vieira in the sense that, Eubanks really has nothing to lose. Like, people were expecting her to get cut. They were just like, oh, here's another fighter from the Ultimate Fighter who hasn't lived up to her potential. But those last 2 fights, she's been dominant. And I know it's Sarah Morris, and I know it's, Avila, who still had some questions as well, but they were really dominant wins for her. And I think just her strength and the fact that she's really putting things together now under the tutelage of Mark Henry, I think is a dangerous combination here. So like I said on Monday, my pick here is going to be Caitlin Vieira, but be wary of Sijara Eubanks and what she's been doing. And not just that, December, I mean, not that long, but it's kind of a long time since she last fought, whereas Eubanks has already fought twice this year. Momentum is a big thing in fights like this. So what do you think about Eubanks, Dan, having this fight on short notice, kind of has that, I got nothing to lose type mentality. And Vieira, I mean, she loses this again. She's really far back down in the rankings.
Yeah, dangerous one for Vieira, but that knockout was surprising, although I'm an Aldana fan. However, I like what I'm seeing from Vieira's social media. It looks like she's got a good camp going, training with a lot of ladies, looks to be in good shape, getting those sparring rounds in. It's going to be a big question answer, to see how she bounces back from that kind of a loss, right? Especially in these divisions. Whereas Sarge, obviously she's been overachieving from odds perspective and otherwise. However, maybe we shouldn't be so surprised. We often forget about her ground credentials, her chin, her output. Her gas tank has gotten better. I think that has a lot to do with the Mark Henry camp. Obviously, he's an output a nut over there, clocking rounds for all the fighters, which is a compliment. I love Mark Henry, especially for that. So you got to give credit where credit's due. However, I'm going to be picking Vieira as well. Essentially, for the wrestling and grappling accolades. Again, she comes from a region, not known for wrestling in Brazil, but when you see those accolades, James, and those championships, those medals, it means something. It means they've been doing it from the judo, from the wrestling and Brazilian jiu-jitsu perspective. I really like her game there. So she's the bigger and stronger girl as well. So I think she's going to dominate positions there. And so long as she doesn't get clipped on anything on the feet, I think she'll be all right. In fact, I think quietly, though, eyes will be on her bouncing back from a knockout loss. It could be Sarge. I mean, in 4 months' time, pretty much, she's going to have gone through however long this fight goes, plus 3 other rounds. Now, against Sarah Moras might have not have been as hard of a fight, but there were some bungalows thrown, especially in that first round against Julia Avila, that would have got most girls in that division out of there if it wasn't for the fact that Sarge has never been stopped or submitted. So even though I don't see Sarge getting stopped or submitted here, James, I will pick Vieira by decision. But similar to if you're a fan of France in the previous fight, which I might officially be picking my pick to Royval, by the way, I don't know if you want to go by the betting lines. I think the line's a bit high, and as far as your caution, it's justified.
And also, just quickly, if you guys are ever looking at any prop bets, Eubanks has never been finished, at least in the UFC. So actually, in her entire career, she hasn't been finished. So keep that in mind as well, that she's very durable, very tough to finish. 3-round fight against a fighter who hasn't fought since December. I think more likely than not, this fight goes the distance. So I think Vieira by decision is the right call. All right, last fight we're going to break down here on the main card of the pay-per-view. Canadian guy, a guy I'm quite familiar with, Hakeem Dawadu, going to be taken on, and I always butcher this, Tukhugov, the teammate of Khabib Nurmagomedov. You guys know who I'm talking about, the featherweight, the one that, has kind of had an up and down career in the UFC. But if you look right now in Blitzbet, you've got Dawadu as the underdog at plus 100. You've got Zubiara at minus 122 here. So that's kind of how I see this fight as well. To me, this is kind of matchmaking where they're trying to figure out who the better guy is in the division, the better up and comer. And I still, even though they have a bunch of fights in the UFC already, I still think they're trying to figure out who the better sort of quote unquote prospect is. Both are under 30. I could see them sort of just, they're both, if I'm looking at here, they're both 29 years old. So yeah, it's kind of an idea to figure out who's who. So as far as Dawadu goes, trains at Champions Creed in Calgary, which is, not like a super gym or anything. He does train with a guy that I'm quite familiar with in Chad Angheliger, who is a double champion in Rise FC, a local promotion here where I live in BC, where he's the flyweight and bantamweight champion. And they're just a gym known for, just really good coaching. Some of the coaches they have there, just really outstanding in terms of that. Dawadu, it's been a bit since we've seen him. UFC 244 was the last time he was in action. He got that split decision win over Julio Arce. And Dawadu, if you remember, had that really disappointing UFC debut a couple of years ago back in at UFC Fight Night 127, where Danny Henry submitted him in 39 seconds. But Dawadu hasn't lost since then. And, he's had some wins, some good wins. The Arce win was definitely good. The Hori win before that, where he actually got the head kick knockout, was great. But we really, I don't think, have seen the Hakeem Dawadu that we were used to seeing in World Series of Fighting and on the regional scene, where he was just finishing guys left, right, and center. And I just wonder, why that is. Is it just because the competition's tougher? Is it that he's maybe, changed his style a little bit? I'm not sure. But that is something to keep in mind, is that this guy does have knockout power. We just haven't seen it a lot in the UFC. Now, for Tukhugov, He's coming off a knockout win over Kevin Aguilar, which is actually a great win because Aguilar is a guy that's very, very, very difficult to finish. I think the only other time he had lost, Aguilar, that is, by stoppage, I want to say it was Leonard Garcia. Yeah, it was Leonard Garcia. So that just goes to show you how long it's been since Aguilar had been finished. So for the Russian to do that in the first round, very impressive. The other fight too that actually looks good on his resume now is the Lerone Murphy draw. I know it was a draw, but Murphy looked good in his last fight too. So that's kind of a nice feather in his cap. And then the only loss he's had in the UFC was against Renato Moicano. It was a split decision, but Moicano, I think we can agree, Dan, now he's at lightweight, but even at featherweight, he's a very talented guy. Had the nice win over Calvin Kattar a couple of years ago too. So I do see Tukhugov as the better fighter. I think he's he's a guy that's a little bit more active. Like I said, he fought earlier this year, and I just think the upside is a little bit more with him there, and not just like look who he gets to train with, Habib and all these other Dagestani fighters. Like that's a huge advantage for him. So I'm going to take him in this fight by decision. I think Dawadu is going to struggle a bit with the pace, but curious to get your technical breakdown on this, Dan, because that's why you're here. You're more of a technical guy, and I'm more of a stats guy.
And and nothing wrong with the stats, by the way. I ain't hating you. You come correct with those, James. You definitely do, my friend. But you mentioned pace, and I would agree, except Hakeem Dawadu, especially in his last fight, I got to go rewatch it. But off memory, and even what the numbers are reinforcing from my memory, I'll use some stats too. Man, that third round, he doubles his output. That's a round where again you watch for guys to fade. And that's where Dawadu, kind of answered the call against a guy I've got a lot of respect for in Julio Arce, who's got a lot of good movement as well, even though a different stance and stylistic standpoint from Tukhugov there. But it's interesting because Tukhugov, we've seen him get tired. Now, again, he was coming off of like a 3.5-year layoff in that Leroy Murphy fight. Leroy Murphy has shown that he is, a guy to watch out for. That perhaps is better than his name, experience, and region may lead you to believe. So it's tricky there. That Abu Dhabi card as well, folks. That was a record hot card as far as like the mat was super hot. It was affecting fighters' gas tanks and performances across the board. So be careful when you're judging that fight, whether it's stats or just going back to watch it straight up. What I do like, though, and something I mentioned before to Hugov's last fight for Kevin Aguilar, is he's got really good movement and a good left hand to watch out for. In fact, one of the only other people I heard saying watch out for the left hand, we'll give him a shout because he usually hosts this year's show. That's Dan Levi. And sure enough, what happened, that left hand found Kevin Aguilar to end the night early. It wasn't a confident pick, but I took a flyer on Hoye because of his movement, and it was really hard. We didn't know how good he was. It was really tough to tell. But just from my eye test, as far as skills go, if he was durable enough to take the shots, which he wasn't, and if he could keep the pace, which he couldn't, that style of in and out and hitting with the left hand in particular could be useful. And we saw that. Yes, Dawadu may have been off balance or in midway throwing a kick on a lot of the knockdowns, but the fact is he was hit, knocked down multiple times, and frustrated. So say what you want before or after. That happened. That was a fact. So against a guy that like Tukhugov, who is more dangerous, more experienced, despite his gaps in set experience that I mentioned. I like him here for that reason. And I like Dawadu, man. He's been surprising me. I love watching his clinch striking. But if he can't get Zubaira out of here, James, let's just say Tukhugov could be on a list of fighters who have been doing really well in the UAE when it comes to the judges. If you remember, folks, I'm not trying to be Mr. Tinfoil Hat guy. That ain't me. But let's be honest and look at facts. So just look at the last sample size of the Fight Island run in this pandemic era, and think about all those really weird McDonald's Happy Meal gift wrap decisions. There may have been guys with names that ended in OV that may or may not have literally gotten all those decisions last time around. That may or may not be a coincidence, but when you're betting on fights, then that could be something to look into. And let's just say I like Tuhugov's the guy where if the fights go to the scorecards in the UAE, I think his name's going to be on 2 of those judges' cards.
Very good point. I didn't even think of that. That's why it's good to have you on here, Dan. These are things that I sometimes miss, and I'll be keeping an eye out for the. I actually got to go back and look on a couple of those cards because I think you're right about some of the some of the really weird decisions on that one. So yeah, we're both taking Zubiara in this fight. We're going to mention just one fight on the prelims, and we'll mention just a few others, just sort of tidbits here. But we got to talk about this Diego Sanchez and Jake Matthews fight. If you guys saw our interview here with Diego Sanchez and Stephan Bonner, Bonner's working with Sanchez. I don't know if that's going to help him. I'm not sure, but obviously Sanchez working with Joshua Fabia mainly and doing that. But Jake Matthews is the biggest betting favorite on this card. And if you go to BlitzBet right now, you can see that Jake Matthews is a minus 714. So I get it. Trust me. Like, Sanchez has not looked the same, in a couple fights now, but it's Jake Matthews we're talking about here. Dan, am I crazy to think that this line's off? I want to get your take on this.
It really can be, because you could look at it and be like, my first angle is the line is off A, and we can get into perhaps, why. But also B, like, Jake Matthews has, I want to say, been finished / had his worst performances anytime he's never fought in Australia. But you could even shoot that theory down, because hasn't he lost in his hometown against one of his weakest competitions? No offense to who is the gentleman from Indiana, as I try to pull him up here. Andrew Holbrook, yes.
Yeah.
So, and that Whitaker Brunson, that was in Australia. So, I mean, Matthews will drop the ball, and no offense, he's a young kid, he's getting better. I'm sure he's a great kid, but yeah, looking at it from a resume standpoint, he will drop the ball. So it's kind of how you want to play it. Rostin Ackman and Emil Meek are definitely scary guys to look at, James. But I don't know how much you want to credit those two wins. That being said, Diego Sanchez, not only is he aging and the bottom is proverbially falling out, even though he's got Bonner in his corner, I believe, and you can correct me here, is the guru going to be in his corner, James? I think that's what it comes down to for me.
Yeah, wow. He is. Yeah, I know. How can you bet on Sanchez in this fight knowing that, just because you're not getting good advice? Let's call it what it is. It's not, guy has no MMA training, And
don't get me wrong. And don't get me wrong, man. I'm a bit smitten on as a Tough One fan, James, to see him link back with Stephan Bonner. Maybe they'll do it. Hey, Diego, where's the asparagus little line? That gets a pop. But let's be honest, man. And I've seen Stephan Bonner from those days. I've seen him in person just as a pedestrian here living in Las Vegas. And, I've interviewed him as well in MMA Junkie Radio over the years. And I don't know what kind of curve that he's on either. Maybe we'll just leave it at that. And it doesn't make me any more confident, James, I guess I'll just say, and I'll just leave it at that. So I don't know how much Bonner, in other words, folks, is going to counterbalance Joshua Fabia in there. And with not just Matthews putting on mass since welterweight, with his striking improving, I actually wouldn't be surprised if, we got a TKO or a late TKO if Matthews is feeling himself. I still don't know if I see Diego Sanchez getting submitted super easily, though.
Yeah, there's a couple things to kind of mention about this. I think the line is too high, like I mentioned there. I think if you look at the decision prop for Jake Matthews, there might be some value. He could finish Sanchez, it's true. But the one thing I will give Diego Sanchez credit for is that if you look at his losses, they're against guys that are pretty notable, right? Like Joe Lozon lost to him at lightweight, lost to Iaquinta at lightweight, lost to Matt Brown at welterweight. But Brown, he packs a punch, right? And then Chiesa, but Chiesa couldn't finish him, which I found interesting. So that sort of makes me think that Matthews might not be the guy to do it, because if you look at Matthews' two fights, they've gone the distance. In fact, you have to go all the way back to June of 2018 was the last time he finished someone. But that's usually how Jake Matthews finishes his fight, is by submission. How many times has Diego Sanchez been submitted? I don't think he has. I'm actually just looking at his record here. I don't think he's been submitted in his career. Now, it's possible he could get knocked down and submitted that way, but Sanchez doesn't strike me as a guy who's going to get tapped out in this fight. So if you're looking for a prop here, it might be worth it to look at the decision prop for Matthews. Just throwing it out there. I know Dan kind of counteracted that, but I think it's worth taking just with Matthews, knowing that, look, he's got to win this fight. He can't lose to Diego Sanchez. And look, that happened to Mickey Gall. Remember, Mickey Gall went in overconfident and ended up paying the price in that one. So Jake Matthews will most likely win this fight. I am picking Jake Matthews here. But at minus 700, there's absolutely no way I would bet that on a guy in Jake Matthews, who frankly has just been inconsistent in his career. And I'll cut him some slack. He came into the UFC at a very young age, and he's still, how old is he now? He's only 26. Considering how long he's been in the UFC, he's a young guy. But just inconsistency is the word that comes to mind. It seems like he's turned a corner, and this is sort of a fight that I think is set up for him to win, so to speak. But I'll just warn people, don't bet the minus 700. That's a bad idea. Don't parlay that. I'm just telling you, you never know. And then, look, Michelle Pereira, should have won that last fight. I mean, we didn't even touch on that, and that, Diego took the DQ. So, well, not DQ. He took the win based off an illegal knee. But Michel Pereira was on his way to winning either a decision or a late finish in that fight, and Sanchez ended up getting it. So realistically, Sanchez should be on a 2-fight losing streak here, 2-2 in his last 4. So just want to throw that out there because Diego's a bit of a wacky guy, and that's, you mentioned the Joshua Fabia thing as well. Like, what if Sanchez is going to do some like weird movement? What if Matthews can't even get on the inside because Diego's doing some weird stuff where he can't even get to him? So that's why I say, like, don't feel like Matthews is going to go out there and starch him. It might not happen. This could just be another weird Diego Sanchez fight. That's sort of what I'm sort of leaning towards.
That's true, James. Even though I do leave the door open for a finish, I think that the decision is most likely. And again, just to strengthen that point, Shinso Ansai is a low percentage do or die fighter who is fighting up at middleweight and welterweight when he's really a small lightweight, and they just had to get rid of his contract because he didn't fight for like years before that. So I don't know how much you want to count. And then you got to go all the way back to Johnny Case in 2016 in a fight that I favored Case to win, and Case kind of just took a weird turn in his career at that point. And within the fight, he also was injured and kind of gave up that submission. Before that was a doctor stoppage, so on and so forth. And not to get too revisionist history, but I think where they really went wrong with Jake Matthews is they gave him Kevin Lee after Johnny Case. Kevin Lee was calling for Sage Northcutt, but really I was at that time saying they should be matching Jake Matthews, babyface from Australia, with the American babyface. Probably would have saved each guy some mileage there, not to play revisionist historian, but had to throw that in there.
Going to quickly just touch on a few other things on the prelims. I'll go through this and I'll get your thoughts after. Dan, wanted to talk quickly about the William Knight and Alexa Kammer fight. Knight winning on Contender Series finally and getting that UFC contract. So he's fought recently. He's going to be taking on Alexa Kammer, who hasn't fought since that kind of disappointing fight against Justin Ledet, in a fight where I think people expect a little bit more. But Kammer and his teammate Jeff Hughes, who I'll talk about here a bit later, was part of Stipe Miocic's camp. So I think that's good for him to get to work with the heavyweight champ here. Knight was knocked out 2 fights before. Kammer is the favorite. I sort of see him winning this fight, but I just think that's a little bit interesting with Kammer getting really good training camp heading into this, and with Knight it's a quick turnaround plus the travel time. So we'll see kind of how that affects him in terms of that. The other fight I wanted to mention, I mentioned Jeff Hughes there. I think this is another possibility of an upset. I think Espinino, Juan Espinino, I should mention the odds right now. Juan Espinino, the Ultimate Fighter 28 winner, he is the favorite here at -303. Okay, the line's gone up. That's crazy. So Espinino at -303, Jeff Hughes +240. There's definitely some value here on Jeff Hughes. Jeff Hughes is a guy that has had just the weirdest amount of circumstances in his UFC career. If you remember, he had that debut fight against Maurice Green, and a guy he already beat, ended up losing a split decision in a fight where I think people felt it could have gone the other way. He had that really weird fight with Todd Duffy last year, which I was at UFC Vancouver, with the accidental groin shot and all that stuff. It was just such an odd fight for Jeff Hughes. And granted, Hughes didn't think look great. Sorry, it was an eye gouge in that fight. That's what I was thinking of in terms of that. But that was like a really weird fight as well. And then his last fight was a fight on short notice against Pessoa, and he didn't look great at all. He ended up losing that fight as well too. So Hughes knows this is do or die. He's got to win this fight. I think there's and with the fact that, like I said, got to train with Stipe Miocic, got to be a part of his camp in that win over Daniel Cormier. I think we could see an upset here, especially with the fact that Juan Espinino, 39 years old, hasn't fought since November 2018 due to the layoff. This could be an upset here. Like on paper, you got to take Espinino in this fight, but Hughes is a guy I think that could pull off an upset as well. So just wanted to mention those 2 fights on the prelims as well. Dan, you got any response to that or any other things you want to talk on the prelims?
I haven't run those through my proverbial comb, so I won't go long. I'll just say that in the spirit of ugly fights, I could see the Hughes fight as a lot of Hughes fights getting ugly, and in that case, Hughes got a lot of value. And even though Kammer is probably the rightful favorite, if this fight gets ugly, then the value is going to be on Thick Willie. Shout out to Brad Taschuk there, but Thick Willie, I love saying that. I love William Knight, man. Since he fought on the first Contender Series the first time, been watching this cat. He will fight out of bad positions and lay the hammer down. So real interested in both those.
Before we wrap things up here on the show, Dan, I want to give you an opportunity to plug all your work, all your social media, anything you want to let the people know where they can find everything, all things UFC 253 heading into Saturday.
Big thanks. Well, of course, here, make sure you guys are subscribing to the channel. Like the video below. Visit us over at linemovement.com, Willie. I'll have my betting articles there where I always have it. Of course, you can find links to all the golf and MMA and other stuff. Octagon Outlook, again, make that a part of your weekly ritual. It is a part of mine. But if you want to visit me on my podcast as well, the Protect Your Neck podcast, you can find it there, as well as my work on MMA Junkie. But whether it's Line Movement, Junkie, everything is posted over on my Twitter at DanTomMMA.
And I'll say it again. Thanks to Daniel Levi for letting me fill his shoes here today. It's always fun getting to chat with my buddy Dan Tom. Hope you guys enjoyed the breakdown today. Like Dan Tom said, make sure you subscribe to the Line Movement YouTube channel. We do the betting show every week, the one you're watching right now. I do Octagon Outlook every Monday at 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. Spoiler alert, this week, we're supposed to be getting James Krause on the show to co-host with me. Last week it was there with Eric Anders. So we're going to try and get a fighter on every week to get a little bit of a different insight into looking at these cards and recapping them as well. So that's tentatively scheduled for Monday at 1:15 p.m. Eastern time. Also, we've been doing a ton of interviews here on the channel. I interviewed Johnny Walker this week. You can check that out off his win over Ryan Spann. Talked to Eddie Cha last night, who gave us some great insight into Korean Zombies training camp in Korea as he prepares for Brian Ortega. And then on this card as well, I referenced it there, Jan Blachowicz, we got an interview with him, got an interview with Diego Sanchez and Stefan Bonner, a duo interview there. So really, you guys get a bit of everything here on this channel. The betting show, you get my show on Monday at 1:15 p.m. Eastern time, and then you get all my good interviews too. So definitely make sure you're tuned to there. And I know there's some hockey fans out there. There's got to be. I'm Canadian. I know there's plenty of you guys out there. Real Kipper, every noon, Monday to Friday, does an awesome job. Love watching that show. It's so cool to be a part of the team with him. He's doing a great job over there and getting some really good guests on there too. They had Biz Nasty on recently. Like, this guy's just, been knocking it out of the park there. So that's it for me. That's it for Dan Tom. I want to thank you guys so much for watching today's edition of today's edition of the Line Movement Betting Show. And we will see you guys next week. It'll be Dan Levi, Dan Tom, but I am James Lynch today signing out. And I hope you guys enjoy the fights this weekend for UFC 253. If you guys like this video, check out all the other videos on this channel, including the ones to my left or right, whichever way you're looking here. But we've also are available on Apple Podcasts. Got to check that out. Line Movement every week, bringing you original content you're not going to find anywhere else.